Question for Thursday night. 1 Samuel 13:14. Up to this point, David has not been mentioned or directly commanded anything that we know of. Is there something deeper here that we should see in how God has been commanding David's life thus far to get prepared for his leadership calling later? If that is true, we can take that into our own lives and the fact of God giving us opportunities to help us grow into the plan He has for us. And now, the question is a great question. And to my knowledge, there's nothing really deep to this. But what you do want to see and get down is the beginning of the order of the book. In chapter 1 through chapter 13, you have the introduction and the establishment of Samuel. We see how that all begins to play out. And then we get with Saul. Those two are really important because when you look at that and you spend a little time with it, you see that obviously we know that Saul was not God's choice. David was. But Samuel tells the nation of Israel that this is not the right guy, and they want him anyhow. So you have there that playing out through the first 13 chapters where Saul does become king and then makes a total mess of it, and then God then begins the process to take the kingdom away from him. Even though he doesn't do it immediately, it begins to go through that process that he loses it. This is in chapter 13 is when he does the offering when he's not supposed to. Then chapter 14 and 15, it carries on, and you see now the kingdom is in decline. It's kind of fallen apart. And then in chapter 16, we have the first mention of David. And this is where David enters the picture and in time goes through his problems with Saul trying to kill him. Saul knows he's going to be his replacement, doesn't want that. And then so we see it all begin to fall apart from there, and then David comes to it. So the question was, is there anything deeper to this? Well, the answer is absolutely, based on how I just broke down the first 16 chapters for you. And it shows you that, that there is a plan here that God is following, and each one of these players, starting with Samuel, there's an incredible amount of information about Samuel that you can get your hands on by studying his life. And we've talked about a lot of that. Samuel was an incredible picture. So, there's so many things that we can glean from that. And then, of course, Saul. Saul is a picture of a terrible leader, and yet he's so many pictures that you can learn from there. So even though he introduces them in the storyline of Israel getting their king by getting the wrong king first and then getting David, the practical things that are hidden in there are quite incredible. And then, of course, when you get to chapter 16 and then you get into David's life, then there's no stopping it. It's just really goes, just keeps on going. So, that's what you got with that one. Now, the next question here, so yeah, there is some deep things there, but nothing in the sense of that, over the top, just the solid, practical things in the types and the pictures that God shows us as He introduces these characters through the book of 1 Samuel. So, just so you know that. The second one here that I want to deal with is, let me find it here. And maybe you've heard this in the news media. It just came into me that there's a motion going to be brought forth with the Southern Baptist Convention that they want to add the Nicene Creed to the Southern Baptist faith. And the question basically was informing me of that and then asking, my thoughts on it. Most people don't even understand what the Nicene Creed is. There's two basic creeds that were put into early Christianity. When I say early Christianity, the Roman Catholic Church. And one of them was the Nicene Creed, and I'll explain that in a moment. And then the other one was actually even before that, was the Apostles' Creed. And here's what you got, well, let me explain this first. The Southern Baptist Convention is probably the most disastrous aspect of New Testament Christianity that you could ever find. By the turn of the century, 1900, it was the largest contingencies of Baptists in the United States, but they were in absolute total apostasy. They were teaching in their major seminary, and they have seminaries all over the country. And most of them, if not all of them, have been infiltrated by the Jesuits, which is how they got destroyed. But anyway, they were teaching that the Bible was just a book of stories, that it wasn't real, it was fables. They said that Adam and Eve was a figment and just a story that never really happened. The flood was just a story, it never really happened. They denied just about everything, and they had gotten so bad and so liberal that they completely were in apostasy. Now, during that time, just to give you a little history, J. Frank Norris had come up in the Southern Baptist Convention, and he was basically, for a while, their fair-haired boy. He was a great preacher. He gave them a lot of good PR, but he also saw the corruption and began to turn against it and preach against the Southern Baptist Convention. This led in time for him splitting from the Southern Baptist Convention and then starting what we know today as the fundamentalist movement, from which this church and many other Bible-believing churches have come out of. And, but the Southern Baptist Convention was in a real mess and still is today. They had a number of splits, but one of the major ones was with a guy by the name of W.A. Criswell. And Criswell kind of broke from the Southern Baptist ranks and started a conservative, back to the Bible, so to speak, Southern Baptist segment. So now we have two segments of it. We have the still liberal branch, which is terrible, and then we have the conservative branch under Criswell, which tries to get back to the Bible. He dies, and then the next guy who takes it over is, and I think he's still alive, is Charles Stanley. And then so Charles Stanley takes the Southern Baptist and tries to hold the conservative side together. So today you have two basic branches of the Southern Baptist Church. You have the liberal side and then the conservative side. But very honestly, the conservative side has no Bible. They're as big a mess as the other guys. And, you'll see sometimes that people will try to promote and study and sell somebody's study Bible. And it's a Bible that you can buy that will have that person's notes in it. The most famous is C.I. Scofield. Now, the old Scofield Bible is a pretty good Bible. The new Scofield is terrible. And the same way they came out with a Criswell study Bible and then also a Charles Stanley study Bible. And as I've told you many, many times, the best study Bible that you're ever going to have is your own. Right. Forget the other guy. Now, the only exception to that I will tell you, and say this so you'll get it and use his notes, and that will become your Bible. I say you get it and use it to enhance your study Bible, and that will be Ruckman's study Bible. I mean, unparalleled. But anyway, so you see how this thing has developed. So, in 325, just so you now understand, in 325 AD, when Constantine has now established what is going to quickly become the Roman Catholic Church, he calls the Council of Nicaea in 325. The Council of Nicaea was in Nicaea, that's a city. He called like 80 bishops from around his area there, which would be his kingdom, Constantinople. None of these bishops were saved. None of them. They were all connected with Alexandria. They're all lost as can be. And he calls all of these people together, and he's going to start now his own church. And this Council of Nicaea was called so that everybody could be on the same page with the teaching and establish for this new church that he was going to start. So the Council of Nicaea was a council that was intended to define what Christianity really was and what Christians should believe. That's what its purpose was. Of course, nothing was farther from the truth. There wasn't a saved guy anywhere within 100,000 light years of that council. And it's a thing where when it was done, then Constantine goes back to his throne, which is in Istanbul today, Constantinople, Constantine's city then, and it's in Turkey. And then he leaves a bishop on the western part of his kingdom, which is Rome. And now we have the start of the Roman Catholic Church. So the Nicene Creed has been adopted into the Catholic Church as the fundamental backbone of what Christians are to believe. It got picked up as the Reformation took place. It got picked up by the Protestants who brought it along. And so today, you'll find the Nicene Creed connected with the Roman Catholic Church, the Methodist Church, the Lutheran Church, Presbyterian churches, and basically the Protestant churches that came out of the Reformation. Never, ever, 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 ever was it ever accepted or adopted by the Bible-believing Christians that we know, Waldensians, the Albigensians, the Huguenots, the Paulicians, wherever you want to go. They knew what it was. They knew what Constantine was. But in history, these groups, because the writers of history are Roman Catholic, they have completely overridden these guys, the true Bible-believing line. And so all you ever get in reading and writing and books and church history, unless you get the right church history, will be the Constantine and his great effort to bring about Christianity out of Rome, which was pagan up to that point, and now it's going to be papal, and off we go. The Bible believers never accepted it. And of course, the Southern Baptist Convention has been infiltrated by the Jesuits for over 100 years. They have destroyed every fiber of the Southern Baptist Convention, much like they have destroyed fundamentalism in BBC or Tennessee Temple or Bob Jones University or wherever you go. And so they're adopting it, and what's happening here, they're getting ready to have their big convention. And 2 or 3 theologians from their big university and a group of pastors are going to bring this in and try to force the issue or pass the issue that they vote on it, that they bring the Nicene Creed into it. The Nicene Creed, all you need to know, is worthless. It is a pagan piece of garbage brought out by Constantine to consolidate his kingdom, to make it all under his thumb and under his control. And so it was a meeting to prod all of these. And then when the Catholic Church got going, I think it was in the Council of Constantinople about 400 or 500 years later, they officially adopted it, and it's been there ever since. So, yeah, it doesn't surprise me. The Southern Baptists, the liberal side, they have gay women pastors, and, you know, they don't have a problem with anything. So they're really in a mess. So it doesn't surprise me one way or the other. But the thing that I want you to go away with is the fact that the Bible believers never, under any circumstances, did they ever adopt it, ever buy into it, ever do anything with it. They were the ones that were very solid with what they believed. And they saw Constantine and what he was doing for what it truly was. And as I say it again, when you are the power that's in control, you get the privilege of writing history from your perspective for your benefit. And you see that all down through history. This is why you got to be very careful reading books about history, because the victors always have the privilege of writing history from their perspective. And you gotta be careful with that, otherwise you'll get tripped into it and thinking that this is really what happened when it wasn't really what happened. This is why the Bible is so important as the stabilizing effect for history. And I don't care if it's 20th century history. The Bible stabilizes history for you through biblical principles that never change. So, even though all this was happening, the Bible believers never accepted it, but because the Catholic Church rewrote history, you'll find when they rewrite history, they brand all these Bible-believing groups as heretical groups. They talk about all of the things that they believe that they categorize as heresy. And of course, they have that privilege because they're in control and they rewrite history from their perspective. That's why you got to be very, very, very careful. When you go off to Bible college someplace, no matter where you go, this is what you're usually faced with. You're usually faced with a system and an organization that is going to give you biblical history, biblical exegesis, biblical truth, biblical theology from their standpoint, overshadowing and overriding the real truth. You've got to be careful with that. So, yeah, the Council of Nicaea, so what? I mean, you might as well, no different than in doctoring Mad Magazine and Sports Illustrated and Field and Stream. I mean, they're all in the same boat. So that's what you got with that one. Now, the next one here came in, and it came in off of YouTube. And it says, and this is a good question too. I like this one. It says, I have a question. I heard the Geneva Bible was the true Bible because King James banned it in 1616 because it had language that said rulers are tyrants. So what is the difference between the KJV 1611 and the Geneva Bible? And did the church start using the Geneva Bible because it was outlawed? Now this is a really good question. I love these kind of questions. These are good questions that the person that asked it shows me that they're a thinker, but it's a good question because it's in an area that you don't generally deal with. Now the Geneva Bible come out in 1560. And it is the forerunner Bible before the King James 1611. Actually, and we're going to get into this when we get into Psalms 12, there are 7 English translations that come up through history as the English language gets developed, and with each edition or each new English translation, things get more solidified with the English language. And the final one, which would be the 8th one, New Beginning, would be the King James 1611 that comes out in 1611, started in 1603 under James the First, King James, as you know him. And so the Geneva Bible was the Bible right before the King James Bible. And here again is where you have to be careful, because you get reading stuff out there, and I'm all for reading stuff. I read more stuff than you could ever imagine. People send me stuff all the time. I read everything you send me. In fact, some of the stuff that you guys have sent me, I got on the back burner. I'm going to use in Psalms here in a couple of months. And, people send me stuff all the time. And I just want you to know, I read everything you send me. Now, some of you guys, I get these. You send me a website and you say, Bob, check this out, this is really good. But you send it to my flip phone. I can't open anything on my flip phone other than my flip phone. If you want me to have something, send it to my email and then make it easy that all I got to do is touch on it and it opens itself up. Otherwise, it may be great, but I never got a chance to read it. So, that little FYI for your information out there. Now, here's a case, and this is why this question is so good. Here's the question where you got to look at the big picture of what is really going on here. I can't overemphasize to you the importance of anything, not only within history or in the Bible, but even in your own life, that you never look at things through a kaleidoscope of limited view. You always want to stop and look at the big picture of something and never just what you're seeing in front of you. I learned that a long time ago. I may be just a little guy, but I always look at the big picture, because the big picture is the key. And that's really what you got here. First off is this. And this is where you got to be careful, because guys will interpret things down through history and interpret it their way. And so they'll say things, or somebody will infer something. But plain and simple, King James never outlawed the Geneva Bible. That did not happen. He did not like it, and he was against it. But the big picture here, I'm going to give you the big picture, then I'm going to give you the really big picture. When you read stuff like this, people get the idea, well, King James didn't like the Geneva Bible because it says here, that it gave the indication that kings were tyrants. And that is true. And that's one of the reasons he didn't like it. But you got to see the bigger picture over it. During this time, there was not only a religious battle going on, but there was a political battle going on. And it was around the Bible. Now, we don't have political things around the Bible today anymore, but back then, the Bible was the key to just about everything. It's not today, but it was back then. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So there is a war going on between the Puritans and the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church is the Church of England. That is the church that King James was the head of. He's over the church as the sovereign over England. And there is a battle going on, not only religiously, but politically, between those two groups. So King James wanted to make sure that he kept control of his kingdom, which was the Church of England. Now, the Geneva Bible had some things in it that he did not like. First off, there were some footnotes in it that leaned toward Calvinism. So he didn't want that. It is true that certain passages indicated that kings could be tyrants, and he took that as in a personal thing toward him. And he didn't like it because of some of the personal things as king, but also some of the political things. Because it was a religious text, but at the same time it was also a political arena against the Puritans and the Church of England. Now, neither one of these groups were Bible-believing groups. So you got to look at that big picture, and then you got to expand it and even look at the bigger picture. This is a case where God allows the junior high kids to fuss and fight on the playground over who's got more marbles than the other kid. And all the time he just lets that pitter-patter go on, he's got an overall plan that he's moving down through history. And he sees that the King James Bible is going to be the final Bible that is going to go to the ends of the world. Because the King James Bible is going to come out when the English language is at its most purest, perfect form. Along with that, God, who cares nothing about the politics of the Church of England or the Puritans. The Puritans were a group that their name really says it. They thought themselves to be so pure that anybody that didn't match up to their standards, they would, in some cases, would kill. The Salem witch trials in Massachusetts, we all remember the Salem witch trials that took place up there. Most people don't understand what happened. That was the Puritans. When they came into this country, there was a group of them that held themselves so pure. And along with their self-purity came self-piety, and then become the point where they just would pass judgment on everybody that they didn't agree with. And so they had, this is what self-righteous people do. I mean, they come to the place where they'll see a real Bible believer and they'll classify the Bible believer as a phony because that Bible believer doesn't line up to their standards. So this is what the Puritans did. So when they saw people that they didn't like or didn't agree with, they claimed that they were witches. And they were not. And they had them burned at the stake. They brought a very black eye to New England during that time. And the Salem witch trials had nothing to do with witches. It had to do with the Puritan church who were self-righteous, who were judging everybody else and then passing judgment on them, claiming that they are not real Christians and phony, when in actuality, they were the phonies. But self-righteousness will always judge other people and never see the value of what God is doing with them, but rather they view it through their own prejudice and their own self-righteous eyes, and therefore they pass judgment on everybody else. They themselves never do a thing for God, but they're always criticizing the ones who do. And this is the Puritans. Now, there was good Puritans within the group. Puritans are an interesting group to study, but during King James's time, he looked at them as a threat. And the Bible that they were really putting forth was the Geneva Bible, and he never outlawed it, but he made it clear that he was not in favor of it. It wasn't to be used in the areas that he was in control of, and therefore it gets interpreted that he outlawed it and he banned it, when he never did. Now, the bigger picture is this. The Bible says in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 8, verse 4, it says, where the word of a king is, there's power. Now, God in his sovereignty in developing the Bible in time in Europe to get it to the world knew that it was going to be the King James 1611 authorized version. And it was a thing where, though the politics and the little rivals going on in England meant nothing to him, he didn't care because they were not the real Bible-believing groups. Believe me, the Church of England shortly after this, even though God used them and used King James, that they were not the ones that were going to take the Bible to the ends of the world. It was the Bible believers in the next 400 years. But God uses nations, kings, to get done what he wants to get done. He cares nothing about the pitter-patter like a bunch of little junior high kids on the playground fighting over this and fighting over that. That's how he looks at it. He uses those things in spite of themselves to get what he needed to get done. He needed England. England was one of two seafaring nations by which he could know he could get the word of God out after King James was gone. The other one was Spain. Spain was Roman Catholic. That's why you see the devil using Spain, Roman Catholic, was going to come up and bring England after Bloody Mary got kicked out, Roman Catholic. James I comes on the throne, or actually it was Elizabeth before James. You know, the Spanish Armada was going to come up and bring Spain back, or bring England back under Roman Catholic rule. And the Spanish had a great armada. England had nothing. And, of course, you know the story. They come up in the English Channel, and God brought up a typhoon, sunk the Spanish Armada, and that ended it. And England went forward. So the hand of God in what he's doing is the bigger picture here than somebody squabbling over what translation of the Bible that they preferred because of their political agenda and their religious conflicts that are going on between the two factions. It's God and his overall big plan. You've got to always see the big plan. Is doing what he's doing in spite of the authors of history that put out stuff like this. That God, in the big picture, is moving through Europe. He now has brought 7 English translations going all the way back to 1200 with Wycliffe and Tyndale. And now he's developing the English Bible based on the development of the English language that in its final form is going to be the Bible that will last till Jesus Christ comes back and be the greatest Bible for the greatest evangelism of planet Earth for the next 400 years, where probably 3/4 of the world are won to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ by that book. But people don't see that. So it wasn't the fact that he outlawed the Geneva Bible. Certainly he didn't like it, and certainly where he had control, he said, we ain't going to use it. And he had a lot of control. But you need to understand the real issue behind this thing, and the question here, and I must have read this someplace, that I heard that the Geneva Bible was the true Bible. Now, here's what you got to know. Every one of those English translations come off the same Greek text. Every one of them. Every one of them come off the exact same Greek text. There's no variation. It's the text that was adopted by the church at Antioch and was preserved down through history. Before there was any English Bibles, the old Latin was off of it, the old Syriac was off of it. And then when the English Bibles began to be formed, they were formed on that Greek text. It was so popular with the Bible believers, it was called the Textus Receptus, which is Latin, which means received text. It was the one the church received. So when you make a statement that the Geneva Bible was the true Bible, that's ridiculous because it's off the same text that the King James Bible came from. So it's not a matter of a different text that is better. It's a matter that as the English got to a perfect form, and it had to be under a king, because the Bible says where the word of a king is, there's power. So he waited till he had James on the throne. King. You know what James means in Hebrew? It means Jacob. He waited till he had a Jewish king on the throne that was connected, a Gentile king on the throne that was connected to Jacob by name. Salvation is of the Jew. And then he put out the final Bible based on that concept, and that is the big picture of what's going on here. And that's why, you know, you just got to really always look at what God is doing, not what groups are doing. This is the key to the Southern Baptist deal, the first question that was asked. And I have taught you now for over 20 years here. Not all of you were here that long, but I have taught you from day one that, you know, there's always a bigger picture to something. And you have to see that. Too many of God's people are too limited in their scope. I'll give you this. You got to be able to do that when you deal with people. People can do something stupid. People can do something that is, you look at and you say, that is the goofiest thing I ever saw. And you have a tendency sometimes to define that person by what that one goofy thing that they did. And you can never do that. You got to look at the big picture of that person's life. Everybody does dumb things. Everybody says dumb things. But you got to look at the big picture of that person, because the big picture is the key to what you really have. Not only dealing with people. And I think that's something that most pastors, if you're going to pastor a church someday, you better get that one down. Because once you get your idea that that's the way this person is, and you don't see the big picture. Now, once you look at the big picture, maybe that's who they really are. But you can't just assume that, because many times a lot of really good people who love the Lord will do some dumb things. And as the old saying is, which I've never really understood, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I've never understood that. If the baby's crying, throw it out. Never understood that concept, but I'll use it. So, the big picture is vital. And we all can see things we don't like. We all can see things that we have a prejudice against. I'm no different than you are. The only difference between me and most of God's people, I never limit myself to just a small porthole of what I'm looking at. If I don't have the big picture already, I'll wait till that big picture will develop. And, but that's what you have to do. And it's a thing where it's certainly true when it comes to the history of anything, whether it's the world, whether it's Israel, whether it's the Bible, whether it's something like this, the development of the Bibles. This is God, like the book of Esther, behind the scenes. And we get so caught up in all the political stuff that goes on and all of the little factions that are fighting against each other. It's a lot like today. We preached on it last Sunday. It's a thing where you look at this country and you see a country that is torn to pieces. You see factions all over the place. You see it, nothing is stabilized. It's an absolute mess. And if that's all you see, then that's all you see. But the big picture is the book of Esther. God's in charge. He's behind the scenes. And he's doing what he's doing now, exactly what he did in 1560 and 1603 and 1611 with the King James Bible. When you start to look at it, you'll see that the King James Bible was started in 1603 and finished in 1611. That's 7 years. That is the same time it took to build the temple in the Old Testament. You got to see things like that. That's the big picture. You got to see the things in Ecclesiastes where the word of a king is, there's power. Now, King James was no saint. A lot of guys don't believe he was saved. I personally believe that he was, but that's beside the point. He was the king and the monarch that at that particular time in history ran everything. I've had guys that upset because the dedicatory, says to the most and high and mighty Prince James. And, you know, they think, well, I wouldn't accept the King James Bible because it's written to a king. That's what you did back then. But, you see that little piece right there. Well, I'm not going to accept the King James Bible because it's dedicated to a king. Well, he's the one that authorized it to be able to be done because that's the way they did. But I'll tell you what. You know the real reason why you won't accept it? Because when you go a little bit farther on in that dedicatory, you'll find that the King James Bible is the only Bible on planet Earth that in the beginning, in the dedicatory, they told you that this book is against the Roman Catholic Church and Calvinism. Popish people. See? Big picture. So it's a thing where I just encourage you always, in every shape or form, get the big picture. And in a case like this, sure, King James didn't like the Geneva Bible. When the Pilgrims came over in 1604, I think it was, or whatever, they came in early 1600s. They brought the Geneva Bible with them. That was the Bible that they had. The Geneva Bible was the standard for many, many years for Bible-believing Christians because they weren't Puritans and they weren't Church of England. They saw it as God's truth for them at that time in their own English language. That's what it was. Now, whether they saw the big picture of what God was doing, I don't know. Hindsight's 20/20. But they accepted it for what it was because they weren't caught up in this political stuff and these religion factions that were there and are so prevalent today in Christianity. They just knew they had a Bible they could trust. They knew that they had a Bible they could believe, and then they dedicated their lives to serving the Lord. You don't find these groups looking at other people saying, well, you know what, they're just a bunch of phonies and no, you're the phony. I mean, they're the ones that are doing the work. But they saw the big picture. And the big picture will always show you what's really going on. So, great question. Great question. And then I got a next one here that I want to get into. I know you don't know this because the message that I preached last Sunday, and by the way, we had 2 guys saved and a third one probably on the way. That rang a lot of bells with a lot of people out there. I had several pastors reach out to me that follow our website. And, I talk to them on either a regular or a semi-regular, not depending on who they are. And they will call me with questions that I can help them through and help them with. And, I have a good relationship with them. They're really a bunch of good guys. And they're just like us. They're trying to build a church to do what God wants them to do. They all believe the book. They're good guys. They want truth. But they're all faced with the same things that many of these young guys are faced with, and that is the opposition that comes up against them. Now, this is the way it is. So, last week's message brought a lot of responses, good responses. And it rang a lot of bells with a lot of guys. And I got this one here that I'll just read it. It says, Brother Bob, I'm a pastor he gives his state, which I won't give. And I watch and follow you every week. Thank you for all you put out in the Bible and for your stand and commitment to building families. I too believe, as you do, families ministering together is the key to a successful church. Your message the last couple of weeks have been eye-opening to me on my mission as a pastor in my own church. I totally agree with what you said about the attack on the 3 foundations, but in particular, the family. But here's what I want to ask you. But I see the same thing in my own church. when it comes to my preaching on helping and dealing with families that have kids in my own church. I've had in some cases people get upset. In a couple of cases in time, people have left because of my stand on the importance of family. Now, this is a real concern for me. I've been pastoring about 10 years, nothing compared to you. I was wondering if you could help me better understand this. And again, thanks for your ministry and all that you do. Well, I said this a couple of weeks ago. Maybe I said it last week. I don't know. And I'm sure you're listening tonight. And as I said, as far as I am concerned, as a pastor, the real biblical solid church will be a church that builds its ministries to the family to protect them, and then to try to build ministry teams together through the families. I showed you Thursday or Sunday that that's what God's plan was for Israel. And that's what he wanted to do. Hence the harsh penalties for rebellious children in the Old Testament. And the beginning of the answer to your question, and very sincere question, but here's what you got to begin to understand, and maybe you already do because you seem to be a pretty sharp guy. Whatever happens in the world, however the world goes, in particular with families, in time it will come into the church. It's just that simple. Years ago, we entered into a segment of Christianity called the Christian school movement. The Christian school movement was a movement within fundamental Christianity that if you wanted to keep your kids, you had to send them to a Christian school. Now, just like everything that the Bible colleges, the gimmick that they come up with, they actually were teaching their young pastors that were going out to start churches that this is the way you start a church. You get a group of people, then you start railing against the public school system, and then you establish a school, Christian school, within your church, and then you beat your people to death or require them to bring their kids to your school, and the kids that come to your school, then you make them also come to your church. And that's how they were taught, that's how you build a church. I mean, give me a break. Nothing could be farther from the truth. But that was what the system was all about. The Christian school movement followed the idea that when you sent your kid to Christian school, when they went into that door to the church, that there was a sign. Now, nobody could see it but the devil. But there was a sign over the door that said, "This is the Christian school. Devil, you cannot come in here." What happened was this. Because the pastors in the churches were not teaching their people, they weren't building families. They weren't building anybody. They looked at nickels and noses, how many you had and how much the offerings were. That's all they cared about. To the pastor and the parent, it was almost given as a guarantee that if you sent your kids to a Christian school, that the world won't get them. And that was the biggest lie that ever came down the pike, other than probably the one that got told to Eve in Genesis chapter 3. And because what it did was, it took the responsibility away from the parents to train and build their kids Because I'm going to tell you one thing that's true about all of us. Every one of us sitting here, including me, human nature is such that we will always take the path of least resistance. Always will. If you are anything for God, and many of you are, if you are really doing something to God with your life, and many of you are, it is simply because you defeated that mindset and you came over and above that mindset that you're going to take the path of least resistance. You now know that to take a stand for God and be what God wants you to be is going to be an uphill fight all of your life, and there's going to be resistance every day of your life. And now you've accepted that. That's why you're where you're at, and that's why who you are, and that's why you're invaluable not only to me, but to the Lord. But you see, the Christian school movement destroyed that because the parents actually thought that by sending their kids to Christian school, that would relieve me of the responsibility of being a parent and building my family. And the devil had a heyday. I can guarantee you the majority of kids that went through that Christian school mentality were destroyed and in the world and come out on the other side wanting nothing to do. You know why? Because it was a bunch of goofy, stupid rules and regulations that had absolutely nothing to do with the Bible. I'm going to tell you something else, Mom and Dad. In most cases, your kids are smarter than you are. They know when something's not right. And these kids went to Christian schools and they realized how phony it was. And they rejected it. And then they had nothing. So they come out of Christian school. Now they have a bad attitude toward that. They have a bad attitude toward church. Gone to the world. It's just that simple. And it's a thing where whatever happens in the world in time is going to work its way into Christianity. And the Christian school movement is where it started. And it's pretty much gone today. You still find some out there, but Christianity is so messed up and screwed up and shot today that, I mean, there are some still out there, but not like it was in the heyday. And yes, I have seen it too, for 50 years worth. And you're going to find that some parents are not going to appreciate your stand on the family and building families. But let me say this, in all fairness, because I want to be 100% fair on this. Most of the people that you're dealing with and the ones that I have seen, fundamentally, are really good people. They're not problem people. They don't cause problems. 99% of them are really good people. They don't cause problems. They just don't do what's right with their families. Now, I'm going to give you some reasons why this is, and you need to. These are things that I have observed for 50 years that are as absolute as the foundation that this church is sitting on, or the foundation that your King James Bible is sitting on. And I've observed this, and this is why it happens. So this is an answer to your question. I don't necessarily have a solution. Well, I'll wait till we get to the end. The first thing I've noticed in almost every case, almost without exception, the fathers are weak. They're weak. They're great guys. but spiritually they're weak. Hey, I've seen pastors who could minister to churches of 2,000, and any time the phone rang, they were there, and they were taking care of everybody else's, but they could not minister to their own families. In most times, they're very disciplined in knowing their Bible, but they're very undisciplined in seeing what the family's needs are, and there's no consistencies. And it's a case where the fathers, for whatever reason, and there's a number of reasons for their weaknesses. And some of them just don't care. Some of them are spiritual zero. I mean, they're nice guys, but they're just never going to get into the Bible and do anything with it. Some of them know their Bible, but for whatever reason, they can translate it out to everybody else, but they can't get it down to their own family. Now, here's the second problem. When the father is weak and fails and doesn't pastor his family, build his family as a minister team, then in most cases the wife takes charge. Now, I can appreciate that, but that's never good. I have seen it where you have some mothers who do the best job that they can. They pick up the slack. I have others I've seen that the lack of the dad being a leader, the mother just is a strong personality, and boy, she takes over the family. And now she runs the roost. Either way, it's not biblical. And either way, it's going to be a disaster. If the mother tries to do what's right and pick up the slack, because she's in an unbiblical scenario, she's going to get resentful. She's going to get to the point where she resents the fact that she has to do it all. The other woman is going to love it, because now she's going to get a whip, a bull whip, and a pair of black boots, and she's going to keep everybody in line. It goes one way or the other. And it's a thing where all this time that this is going on, the kids are being shortchanged. They're not getting everything that they need to get. And here's the next thing. Families can get away with that when the kids are little, because all little kids do goofy things. So they can just chalk it up to, well, he's 9 years old, he's 10 years old. You just chalk it up to, well, he's just a kid. That only works till they hit about 14, 15, or 16. Now you can't hide it anymore. Now, all the time you were chalking it up, and the dad was not doing what he needed to do, and the mother was either one of the two, that she was breaking her back to try to hold the line, or she was taking charge and became Ava Brahm of the family. I'll tell you who saw that your kids were going to have problems, because I hear it all the time. The elementary workers who watch your kids on Sunday. Because when your kids aren't under your kids are smarter than you. They play you. They learn very quickly. They learn by the time when they were first born. They learn how to control you. You put the baby in the bed, turn out the light, give him a little kiss, and the baby starts to cry. I want to go to bed. What do? You run back in. You pick it up. You carry it around. You kiss it some more. You put it down. You turn the light out. You go back out. The kid cries again. You train the kid that if they cry, you're coming back. This is going to sound cruel. Let them cry themselves to sleep. Because if you don't do what's right, later on when they're 18 and 19, you're going to be crying yourself to sleep. I just threw that in. I think that's pretty good. So, you're blinded to it. You're blinded to it because, I don't know, maybe you don't want to see it. You're blinded to it. But everybody else sees it, and certainly the people working in the elementary. They see it. And because once you're out of their line of sight, then they become who they really are. See? I mean, it's so easy, it's unbelievable. And when they hit 16 or 17 or 18 or 19, now you can't hide it anymore. It's obvious by what they're now doing or what they don't do. And this is where you're coming to in your church. I appreciate the fact that you want to build families. I appreciate the fact that you're preaching on it. I hope you don't lose faith and succumb to whatever pressure. I don't know what's in your church, but I hope you're stronger than that, and I think you probably are. Now you begin to see that they're really in trouble. Now, because of the social media, your kids are coming to you saying, did you see what so-and-so pasted on their Facebook? Do you see what they said? Do you see what they're doing? I had one kid one time do a video on Facebook teaching people how to smoke marijuana. And his mom and dad were in our church. Now you can't hide it anymore. Now it's out of your control completely. And now you feel even more pressure by your messages, but also by the families in the church who do what's right with their kids. Now you stand out like a sore thumb. And it's a thing where it's becoming obvious to everybody that there's some real problems here. Now, there have been no real ministry with mom and dad together with the kids. So now the kids don't care nothing about ministry. They have seen the fallacy of, and now they look at, many times, not always, but many times they look now at Christianity through the prism by which they have seen it in the family. And now when you really preach your messages to your people, and you should, and don't ever stop, because in your church, just like in any church, there's going to be young couples who who want to do what's right, they want to build their families, they want to make sure that they do everything they're supposed to do, and it's your job to make sure they get the tools. So, but you need to know this, when you really preach on family and kids and the responsibility, it's going to hit them right between the eyes. They're faced now with kids who are rebellious. Now they don't want to go to church. You don't know how to deal with that. You can't say to them, because you're weak, we're going to church. Pack your Bible or pack your bags. We're going to church. You can't do that. You've lost that opportunity. You have given them over and lost any influence in their life because you were never a real biblical influence in their life. So here you are. Now they get the wrong boyfriends. Now they take the wrong jobs. Now they get hooked up with the wrong friends. And parents can do nothing because it's too late. No, that's not exactly true. There's always something you can do, but weak parents just never seem to do it. So yes, what you're experiencing, Pastor, is exactly what happens when the things of the world filtrate down into the very church of Jesus Christ. And families get attacked. In every church, you're going to have weak families. Your job, my job, is to try to make them as strong as you can. You know as well as I do, some you can and some you cannot. And in time, a few of them, some of them, most of them will not. But you're going to find, as you said in your email to me, that some of them, a few of them are going to leave your church. And it's because, they're being exposed. They don't know how to deal with it. They don't want to deal with it. And your preaching has just brought to light too many issues that they're not willing to deal with. They have lost their kids, and now, they resent anybody's preaching on it. And let me just say this, in their defense, I understand that. Why would you want to go to a church where every week you get a bloody nose if you don't like bloody noses? Now, for the real Christian, the Bible says that he that loveth the honeycomb, even the bitter things are sweet. A real Christian likes a good bloody nose. A good Christian likes coming to church and getting slapped 6 ways from Sunday because he knows that's what he needs. He's not under some false pretense here that he's above that. He knows that he needs that. It's accountability that leads to responsibility in every area of our lives. And so some of them, a few of them, in time, yes, they will leave. But I want to say again, they're not bad people. Most of them that I've known in my years are good people. They're just weak people. And their weakness could only go so far, and now the kids are running up the red flag for everybody to see. They're embarrassed. They don't know what to do about it. And so what do? Now, I don't know the details of your church, but what I'm about to give you is worth $100 billion in gold. I don't know what goes on in your church. I don't know the details of it. You sound like a really good guy. You're preaching the truth. You sound like you're really on track to build a good church. Praise the Lord, brother. We need another 1,000 like you. But what I'm about to tell you is worth $100 billion in gold. This is something that I've watched for 50 years, plus years. In every case, when somebody, because of your preaching in this particular scenario, that they've lost their kids, and the kids are not, and like I said, not all of them will go, but the ones that do go, I'm promising you, mark it down. I'm telling you, when they do go, in every case, they go to the church or a church where the pastor has lost his kids. Never seen it fail. They don't do that by design. I don't think they sat down and said, well, the pastor here at this church, he's just preaching all these hard messages on family, and, we haven't done right ours, and our kids, I got a kid over here doing this and a kid over here doing that, and, I just can't take this anymore. So, what I'm going to do? I'm going to look through all the churches out there, and I'm going to find a pastor out there who's lost his kids, so I'll go to his church so I don't have to listen to him preach about kids being lost to the world anymore. They don't think like that. Human nature will always take the path of least resistance. So they'll go to a church where the pastor has lost his kids to the world. Because there, they'll never hear a message like you preach, Pastor. on family. Why? Because he's lost his kids too. What is he going to do? Well, today I want to preach to you about how I lost my family because I didn't do what's right. I know the Bible says in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 4, I'm not to be a pastor, but I need the money. And now they just fit in perfectly. And now at a church where the pastor lost his kids, 1 Timothy 3:4, so he has no biblical ground to pastor, but who cares? We pick and choose. And the people in his church who have lost their kids to the world, and everybody's now happy. They can preach nice little sermonettes, they have nice little singers, they have little praise bands, they have this, but not one sermon ever on protecting your family and families ministering together, which is the key to a successful church. Now that's what you got, brother. And what do you do? You save as many of them as you can. And it's a thing where you got to try to reach as many of them as you can. If there's some you're not going to. And I said, I've had people in my church who have lost their kids, and made the biggest mess out of it you ever saw in your life, but they realized that. They came, we put a plan together, and they redeemed the time and did what they needed to do. And it's one of those things where, hey, you know what? You can't get around that. I want to leave you with a couple of things, and this is also worth a lot of money. But that one I just gave you about, you just watch it. They'll leave your church and they'll go to a church where the pastor has completely lost his kids because they know they're safe there because they're never going to hear one of those god-awful messages that you preach about the family. In ending this up for you, a couple of things. When a few of them do leave, they will always blame you or somebody else for why they're leaving. Now, here's how you know that this is another just smokescreen. If somebody has a problem with you, pastor, before they decide to leave the church, they ought to bring that problem to you so they can work the problem out and get it fixed. The reason why they don't bring it to you, because they know if they got it fixed, then they would not have a reason to leave. See how that works? I mean, it's just that simple. Now, the classic example of what we're talking about in the world today. It's before all of us in the news. Hunter Biden. Classic example. Here's a kid that had been enabled by his parents all his life. Here's a kid who never heard the word no. Who's a kid that, while dad was out politically running the world and doing the world for all the years in politics, obviously did nothing for the kid. This kid was enabled in everything that he did. He just gave him more, gave him more, gave him more. Nobody ever said to him, you can't hang out with that crowd. No, you can't put that in your body. No, you can't go there. No, you can't do that. He heard none of that. They allowed him to do whatever he wanted to do. There were absolutely no restrictions on him. And you know what it produced? It produced the problems that this guy, now 50-some years old, has got in his life that are probably going to change his life for the rest of his life. And you're going to find, in both cases, in your church and in this case, Hunter Biden was found guilty on 3 counts. It's pretty much a slam dunk shut case. The dad says, well, I accept the rule of law, da-da-da-da-da-da, openly. What else is he going to say? Privately, it's already been reported that he thinks his son was targeted and that his son is a victim. Victim status is where this always goes in both cases. His mom and dad are going to say and feel that he is a victim. The people in your church, the ones that do leave, very few of them ever will. Some of them just stick around and be miserable the rest of their life. But the bottom line is this: many of them will play that victim card. Well, my son and daughter's a victim. I've had parents lose their kids in a tragic way. And the mom or the dad stand there and tell me that the reason why that kid was the disaster that they are was because of the person that they married. Or in some cases, the people that they hung out with. Trying to play the victim status that my son or daughter is a victim because of who they married or the friends that they hung out with. My answer to that is simply this: who taught them the value system on picking a husband or a wife? Who taught them the value system of picking friends? Now, everybody likes to play the victim card. And I got to be honest with you, I agree with them. If your child winds up in the world, if your child winds up being the embodiment of Jack the Ripper, if your child winds up just walking away from God and everything that there is, I agree with you that your child is a victim. But they're not a victim of the friends or who they married or who they're hanging out with. They are a victim of bad parenting. And that's what you've got. It's not going to go away. It's something that you're going to have to accept into your church, because wherever the world goes, shortly thereafter, the church goes. But what you can do, and I commend you for this, hold the line. Don't cave in. If they want to leave, let them leave. Don't be mad at them. Don't badmouth them. Don't think ill of them. Give them grace. Understand how terrible it must be to sit under good, strong biblical preaching when you ain't doing biblically right. I get that. I sympathize with you. And if you're not going to do what's right, I agree. Go the path of least resistance. Find some marshmallow guy someplace that'll tickle your ear, that'll do all the things, put all the things that a church has, except when it comes down to the most important element that's going to make or break your life and the ministry and the church, your family, he can't preach on because he's lost his. Hold the line, pal. Don't ever give in, because in your church, as in any church, there's going to be lots of young couples coming up that want to do what's right. You cannot ever sacrifice the ones that want to do what's right because some people don't like the truth that you preach. You got to stay tight. Keep preaching. Don't compromise. And yet at the same time, love them. Don't get an attitude toward them. Don't make them the enemy. You never know when, they're going to ever come to their senses and say, well, what can I do? But the bottom line is never shut the door. You always want to leave it open a little bit that they can come back in just as they left. And it's a thing where that depends on your attitude of seeing the big picture here. Understanding you can't take this personal. You're doing what you're supposed to do. Not everybody is going to like it. Not everybody is going to appreciate it. Not everybody is going to love the hard messages that you preach, because most people don't like getting beat up. But God's people are to endure a hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. And every Sunday we ought to leave just a little bloodied. And if you don't, then there's something wrong with your preaching. And if you preach good hard messages and you got people that don't like it, then you're doing something right. So it's a thing where you got to see the big picture. From your email to me, you're a good guy, you're doing a good job. Always try to save the ones that you can. But never develop an attitude, and in each particular case, you try to formulate a plan to be able to help them. Maybe it won't work, maybe they don't want it. That's beside the point. You never give up on people. That's the key. And the key to not giving up on people is not looking at it through your little prism, but looking at and seeing people in the big picture. If you need me, pal, you call me. I'm here for you. Well, we'll hold up there today. Let me just say to you that we have tonight, back for the first time since their new baby,